My daughter-in-law, Chantel, insisted on a closed casket for my son's funeral. At the graveside, while she performed her role as the grieving widow, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was my son Jamal. He wrote, "Mom, I'm alive. That's not me in the coffin. Don't trust my wife." In that single heart-stopping moment, my grief turned into a cold, calculated rage. And I promised the heavens above that I would not rest until I uncovered the truth and made them pay for their deception. Before I tell you about the very first call I made after that funeral, a call that set everything in motion, I want to know where you're listening to this story from. Please let me know in the comments below, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe in the power of a mother's intuition. My name is Imani Washington. I am 72 years old, and for 35 of those years, I was the principal of North Atlanta High School. I have seen every kind of deception a human mind can invent. I have looked into the eyes of teenagers trying to lie about skipping class, and I have looked into the eyes of parents trying to lie about their child's behavior. I know the look of a genuine mistake, and I know the look of a calculated lie. Standing there under the oppressive August sun in Atlanta, the air thick with the scent of gardenias and freshly turned earth, I knew I was a spectator at a poorly rehearsed play, and the lead actress was my daughter-in-law. Chantel stood beside me, a delicate black veil covering her face, a perfectly manicured hand clutching a lace handkerchief. Her sobs were theatrical, arriving on cue whenever an old friend of the family or a member of our church would offer their condolences. I watched her not as a mother-in-law, but as a principal. I saw the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes, hidden behind the veil, darted around assessing her audience. She wasn't mourning a husband, she was managing an event. The story she spun was as smooth as silk and just as thin. My son Jamal, a brilliant tech entrepreneur and the most careful driver I have ever known, had been in a fatal car accident. She said he was driving home late on the I-285, that a truck had sideswiped him, causing a multi-car pileup and a fire that had left his body unrecognizable. It was a story full of holes that only a family blinded by sorrow would fail to see. Jamal never took the 285 at night. He called it the raceway. He had a driver for late meetings and a fire. The police report I'd seen mentioned impact but nothing about a fire. My mind drifted back to a conversation a year ago. Jamal and I had been planning to create a scholarship fund for promising students from our community. It was a dream we shared. A week later, he called me, his voice hesitant. He said Chantel thought it was a wonderful idea, but that perhaps they should wait. Their finances were a little tight. 2 days after that, she posted a picture on Instagram of the brand new Bentley he had just bought her. I remember looking at the picture, at her triumphant smile behind the wheel, and feeling a cold knot of dread in my stomach. She didn't just want my son's love. She wanted his legacy, his wealth, all for herself. He saw a vibrant, supportive partner. I saw a woman who looked at my son like he was a winning lottery ticket she was impatient to cash. The pastor's voice pulled me back to the present. We now commit the body of Jamal Washington to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. As the first shovel of dirt hit the polished cherry wood of the coffin, a vibration against my hip startled me. I frowned, reaching into the pocket of my dress. It was my phone, a text from a number I didn't recognize. Annoyed at the interruption, I glanced down. The screen was bright against the gloom of the funeral tent. My breath caught in my throat. My heart, a tired old engine, suddenly hammered against my ribs. The world around me dissolved into a muted hum. The words on the screen seemed to burn into my mind. "Mom, I'm alive. That's not me in the coffin. Don't trust my wife." I read it once, twice, a third time. My training, my lifetime of managing crises kicked in. I compartmentalized the explosion of joy and fear in my heart. My first thought, a prank. A horribly cruel, disgusting prank. But my gut, the same gut that had guided me through 35 years of schoolyard fights and teenage tragedies, screamed that this was real. I typed a single trembling question in response, my fingers surprisingly steady. "Who is this?" The 3 dots of a reply appeared almost instantly, making my blood run cold. This was real time. This was happening now. The reply came, Can't say now, they're watching. I'm in danger. Just don't trust her, please. They're watching. I slowly lifted my head, my eyes scanning the crowd of mourners. Friends, family, church members. Any one of them could be an accomplice. My gaze finally landed on Chantel. She had her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with what appeared to be uncontrollable grief. But as I watched, she subtly shifted her weight, and through the fine mesh of her veil, I saw her eyes flick towards me, then quickly away. She wasn't just watching me, she was checking on me, making sure I was playing my part. The pastor said, "Amen." The funeral was over. People began to move to speak in hushed tones, to line up to offer me their final sympathies. But I was frozen in place. The grief that had been a heavy shroud on my soul was gone. In its place, something cold and familiar settled the quiet certainty of a principal who has just caught a student in a devastating lie. I looked from the phone in my hand to the coffin being lowered into the ground, and then to the woman who called herself my son's grieving widow. She was no longer my daughter-in-law. She was the subject of my investigation, and her world was about to come crashing down. I drove away from the cemetery in a daze, the world outside my windshield muted and unreal. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I didn't go home. Home was a museum of memories, and right now I couldn't face them. I drove to a small park overlooking the city, a place I used to bring Jamal to when he was a boy, and I made the only call I could. The phone rang twice before he picked up. His voice was deep and professional. "Jones Investigations." "Mark," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's Imani Washington." The professionalism vanished instantly, replaced by a warm, familiar concern. "Mrs. Washington, I'm so sorry about Jamal. I just heard this morning. My deepest condolences. Are you all right? Is there anything I can do?" "I need you, Marcus," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Not as a friend, as an investigator, and it has to be completely off the books. I can't go to the police." There was a pause on the line, but not of disbelief. It was a pause of a man shifting from one gear to another, from personal to professional. "Understood," he said, his voice now crisp and focused. "Where are you? I'll come to you." As I waited for him on that park bench, my mind drifted back 25 years. I saw a 15-year-old Marcus Jones sitting in a chair in my principal's office. He was skinny and angry with eyes that were far too old for his face. He was on his last strike, about to be expelled for fighting. The school board saw a lost cause. They saw his patched-up jeans, the chip on his shoulder, and the address in a part of town they preferred to ignore. They saw a statistic in the making. But I saw something else. I saw a brilliant, fiercely loyal mind trapped in a world that had given him nothing but reasons to fight. I saw the way he protected his younger sister from bullies, the way he aced his math tests even when he skipped half his other classes because he was working a cash job to help his grandmother with rent. I remember that final meeting with the school board. They had his file open on the polished table, a list of transgressions. "Imani," the superintendent had said with a sigh, "we can't save them all." I looked him right in the eye. "You're not saving him," I had said, my voice quiet but firm. "You are investing in him, and I will personally guarantee the return on that investment." I went to war for that boy. I fought the school board. I called in favors I didn't know I had. I found him a mentor, a lawyer in our church who saw the same fire I did, and I secured a scholarship to a private academy that could challenge his mind instead of just punishing his anger. I saw the potential under the rage. I made a bet on him, and he had never, ever forgotten it. Now the boy I had saved was the only man I could trust to help me save my own son. Mark's black SUV pulled up a few minutes later. He got out, a tall, powerfully built man in a sharp suit that couldn't hide the strength in his shoulders. His face was a mask of concern. He didn't hug me. He just sat beside me on the bench, giving me his full, undivided attention, a sign of respect I valued more than any empty gesture. "Tell me everything, Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice low and steady. I told him. I told him about Chantel's perfectly rehearsed performance, the inconsistencies in the accident story, and then, my voice dropping to a whisper, I told him about the text messages. I showed him the phone. He read the words, his expression hardening from one of concern to one of cold, analytical focus. He didn't doubt me for a second. He knew me. He knew my mind was not one that succumbed to fantasy, even in grief. "Okay," he said, handing the phone back. His mind was already working the pieces, clicking into place. "My first instinct is always to go to the police, but your instinct to wait is the right one. Let's play this out. Let's walk the scene. You go into any precinct in this city right now. You, the grieving mother of a prominent businessman, a pillar of the community. You present this story to a detective who is juggling 20 other cases, drowning in paperwork, and has a deep-seated cynicism about the world." He leaned forward, his gaze intense, forcing me to see the situation through his eyes, through the cold lens of the law. "What do you have really? You have a text from an untraceable burner phone, a phone a defense attorney will argue that you could have bought yourself. You have a mother's intuition, which, God bless it, means nothing in a court of law. It's hearsay, it's speculation. Your daughter-in-law, on the other hand, the beautiful tragic widow, has everything. She has a story that, while full of holes to us, sounds plausible enough to the casual observer. She has an official police report. She has a signed death certificate. She has a mountain of socially acceptable proof. Who do you think they're going to believe?" His words were a cold dose of reality, but I knew he was right. I had spent my life navigating bureaucracies. I knew how they worked, how they protected the status quo. "Her lawyer and she will have the best one money can buy." Mark continued, his voice low and methodical. "We'll paint you as a grief-stricken old woman. A mother who is understandably in denial, confused and lashing out at the woman her son chose. They will say you never liked her, that you're projecting your sorrow. They might even be cruel enough to file a motion to have you psychologically evaluated to get you committed to take control of your part of the estate under the guise of protecting you from yourself. We would lose any chance we have. The element of surprise is the only weapon we've got right now. We can't give that up." He was right. Chantel had built a fortress of legal and social credibility around herself. She was the grieving widow. I was the heartbroken mother. In the court of public opinion, she held all the power. We couldn't attack that fortress head-on. We had to find a crack in the foundation, a secret passage. "So what's our first move?" I asked, my voice steady. The helplessness I had felt earlier was burning away, replaced by a cold fire. This was a problem, and I had spent my entire life solving problems. "Motive," Mark said instantly. "In every case, you start with motive. 99% of the time, it's about money. I'm going to start digging into their finances, Jamal's will, his assets, any recent changes, and especially life insurance. I have a few contacts who owe me favors, people in the financial world who can access things quietly. It's a long shot, but it's a start. You, Mrs. Washington, have the hardest job. You go home. You act the part of the mourning mother. Let Chantel think she has you exactly where she wants you. Let her believe her performance was a success. Don't call her. Don't text her. If she calls you, you cry. You be the sad, broken old woman. Can you do that?" I thought of my son out there somewhere, hiding, trusting me to be his general. I thought of Chantel's triumphant smile in that Bentley, the smile of a woman who had just gotten everything she ever wanted. "Oh, yes," I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. "I can do that. I have been underestimated my entire life. It is a place where I am very comfortable." For 48 agonizing hours, I played the part. I let friends from church bring me casseroles I couldn't eat. I answered condolence calls with a trembling voice, letting my genuine sorrow for my son's situation fuel the performance. I sat in my quiet house, surrounded by photos of my son at his graduation, at my retirement party, on a fishing trip with his father. And I let the world believe my heart was broken. But with every passing hour, my heart was hardening into a diamond-sharp point of resolve. On the second day, late in the evening, Mark called. He didn't waste time with greetings. His voice was tight with a controlled anger that I knew all too well. It was the anger of a man who has just seen the ugly truth of a case. "I found it," he said. "It's worse than we thought." "What is it?" I asked, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. Jamal had a life insurance policy, a standard one through his company for a couple of million, but that's not the one I'm talking about. 6 months ago, a new policy was taken out, a private one through a high-end firm, for $10 million. The sole beneficiary is Chantel. $10 million. The number hung in the air, obscene and terrifying. It was the price of a new Bentley, a mansion, a lifetime of luxury. It was the price she had put on my son's head. "There's more," Mark said, his voice low and furious, and this was the part that sealed it, the detail that removed any lingering doubt. I pulled the claim records. I had a friend at the firm run a check. She filed the paperwork to receive the $10 million payout yesterday morning, less than 48 hours after the official time of death was declared. She didn't even wait for the funeral to be over, Mrs. Washington. She was at the insurance office first thing Monday morning, documents in hand. I closed my eyes, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place with a horrifying certainty. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a business transaction. My son's life was the price of admission to the life Chantel believed she deserved. The quiet, obedient grief I was performing was no longer just a tactic. It was a mask, and behind it, a mother's war was about to begin. For 48 agonizing hours, I played the part. I moved through my house like a ghost, accepting phone calls and visitors, my face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. Friends from Ebenezer Baptist Church brought over casseroles and pound cakes, their eyes full of a pity I could not yet accept. They would hug me, whispering, "He's with the Lord now." Imani and I would nod, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. They saw a mother grieving her only son. They had no idea I was a general preparing for war. I answered condolence calls with a trembling voice, letting the genuine ache for my son's safety fuel the performance of my sorrow over his supposed death. I sat in my quiet study, the room where my husband Robert had read his newspapers and where Jamal had done his homework, surrounded by photos that were now ghosts of a life that had been stolen. I looked at Jamal in his graduation gown, his smile so wide and full of promise. I looked at a picture of all three of us at a family reunion years ago. Robert's strong arm around my shoulder, my son's arm around his. With every passing hour, my grief was burning away, leaving behind something harder, sharper. It was the quiet, steely resolve of a woman who had been underestimated one too many times. On the second day, late in the evening, my phone finally rang. It was Mark. I answered on the first ring, my whole body tense. "Tell me," I said, my voice low. "Are you sitting down?" Mrs. Washington Mark's tone was different. The professional calm was still there, but underneath it was a current of barely suppressed anger. "I'm fine, Marcus. Just tell me what you found." "I started with the will, like we discussed." He began, his voice methodical, the voice of a man laying out the facts of a case. "It's straightforward. He left the company in a trust, the house to you and Chantel jointly, and his personal assets split between you. Nothing out of the ordinary there. I checked his corporate accounts, his personal finances. Everything looked clean. Too clean, actually. I waited my patience thin, and I had a hunch," he said. "A man with Jamal's net worth usually has more complex financial instruments in place. So I made a call. A friend of mine, she's an underwriter for one of the big private insurance firms downtown, the kind that deals with high-value clients. I asked her to run a check off the record for any policies taken out by Jamal Washington in the last year. I heard the sound of paper rustling on his end of the line. She found it, Mrs. Washington. 6 months ago, a new life insurance policy was taken out, a private one not connected to his company, for $10 million. $10 million. The number hung in the air, obscene and terrifying. It was a motive printed in black and white. It was the price of a new Bentley, a mansion, a lifetime of luxury. It was the price she had put on my son's head. The sole beneficiary, Mark continued, his voice grim, is Chantel Washington. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea washing over me. The woman who had cried crocodile tears into a lace handkerchief at my son's grave had been planning this for months. She had smiled in my face, eaten at my table, all while holding this monstrous secret in her heart. "There's more," Mark said, and his voice dropped even lower, filled with a cold fury that mirrored my own. "This is the part that you need to prepare yourself for." I asked my friend to check the status of the policy. I held my breath. "She filed the claim to receive the $10 million payout yesterday morning, Mrs. Washington, less than 48 hours after the official time of death was declared. She didn't even wait for the funeral to be over. She was at the insurance office first thing Monday morning, documents in hand, ready to cash in. That was it. That was the detail that shattered any remaining sliver of doubt, any faint, foolish hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. The speed of it, the sheer cold-blooded efficiency. She hadn't even had the decency to pretend to mourn for a full week. Her grief had a deadline, and the deadline was the bank's opening hours on Monday morning. I didn't cry. The time for tears was long past. A different emotion was rising up inside me, something ancient and powerful. It was the rage of a mother whose child had been threatened, a rage that was as clear and as cold as ice. The woman my son had married was not just greedy, she was a predator, and she had made a fatal mistake. She had forgotten who his mother was. She saw a quiet 72-year-old retired principal. She had no idea she had just declared war on a woman who had spent a lifetime fighting for children. And I would not lose. The $10 million insurance policy was the motive. It was the why. But I needed the how. I needed to know who was in my son's grave. For a week I lived a double life. By day, I was Imani Washington, the heartbroken mother accepting condolences and pans of macaroni and cheese from my concerned neighbors. I went to church, I prayed with my pastor, and I allowed my sister to sit with me for hours, holding my hand while I stared blankly at the television. I was a convincing phantom of grief. But by night, the real Imani took over. I sat in my study, a fresh pot of coffee, brewing a legal pad in front of me, going over every detail, every timeline, every inconsistency. I was a principal again, preparing for the most important investigation of my life. Every evening I would speak with Mark. His voice was a lifeline of calm professional focus in a world that had tilted off its axis. He was my partner, my soldier, in a silent war. On the 8th day, after the funeral, he called. His tone was different. It wasn't the angry discovery of the insurance policy. It was something colder, graver. "Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice low. "I have an update. It's solid. Are you somewhere you can talk freely?" "I'm in my study, Marcus," I replied, my back straightening. "No one is here. Tell me." "I've been working on identifying the body in the casket," he began. It wasn't easy. As the next of kin, Chantel has every record locked down tight. But I have a contact at the Fulton County morgue, a good man who owed me a big favor from an old case. I asked him to pull the records for the John Doe who was listed as the primary victim in that I-285 pileup. I held my breath, gripping the edge of my late husband's mahogany desk. "He got me the file this afternoon," Mark continued. "The body was badly burned, just as the report said. No prints on file, no dental records matched any missing persons reports. He was a ghost, a nobody. But here's the part that my contact flagged as strange. Usually a John Doe, especially one in that condition, sits in the morgue for weeks, sometimes months, waiting for someone to come looking. This one was claimed in less than 3 days." "That's too fast," I whispered. "That's what he thought too," Mark said. "It gets worse. It wasn't claimed by a family member or even a standard funeral home. The body was officially released to a corporation, a company called Southeastern Logistical Solutions. The name sounded sterile, anonymous. It was a name designed to be forgotten. A logistics company claimed a body." "Exactly." Mark's voice was grim. "It's a ghost company, a shell corporation registered 6 months ago. It has a mailing address at a P.O. box in a strip mall and a bank account that was opened and closed in the same week. It's a phantom designed for a single illegal transaction. But they made a mistake. To register a corporation, you have to list an officer. A name. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. The link. I pulled the state incorporation papers this evening. "Mrs. Washington," Mark said, his voice dropping as he delivered the final blow. "The name on the registration, the sole officer of the company that claimed the body of the man buried in your son's grave, is Andre Crawford. Chantel's cousin, the one who worked in import-export, the one who always had a little too much cash and a smile that never reached his eyes." The conspiracy was no longer a theory. It was a fact as solid and as cold as the marble tombstone in the cemetery. This wasn't just about faking a death. This was about murder. They had found a man with no name, no family, no one to cry for him, and they had used his body as a prop in their disgusting play. They had killed him, burned him, and buried him under my son's name. A wave of cold, pure rage washed over me, so potent it almost took my breath away. It was a rage for my son, who they had tried to erase, and it was a rage for that nameless man, a victim they had treated like trash. My mission was no longer just about finding Jamal. It was about reclaiming the dignity of the man they had thrown away. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You've given me the truth. Now I have to figure out what to do with it." I was no longer just a mother. I was a witness, and I would make sure justice was served. The confirmation that the man in the coffin was a stranger, a victim used as a pawn in their disgusting game, settled into my soul like a block of ice. The rage I felt was so pure, so cold that it left no room for tears. Mark and I had spoken for an hour, mapping out our next steps, but we had hit a wall. We had the motive, the $10 million insurance policy. We had the conspiracy the body claimed by a shell company run by Chantel's cousin. But we still didn't have the full picture. We didn't have the irrefutable evidence that would stand up in court, the kind of evidence that would protect my son and expose Chantel for the monster she was. After Mark left, I sat in my study for what felt like hours, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I stared at the backup hard drive sitting on my desk, a small black box holding a universe of secrets, all locked away behind a password I couldn't begin to guess. I felt like I was standing before a locked fortress with no key and no way in. I closed my eyes and prayed not for a miracle, but for guidance, for a sign from my son. As if in answer, my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. A new message, from the same unknown number. My heart leaped into my throat. I snatched the phone, my hands trembling as I read the screen. It was a single cryptic phrase so out of place in our life or death situation that it made no sense at all. Aunt Bessie's sweet potato pie. I stared at the words, my mind racing. What was this? A code, a distraction? Was it possible the phone had been compromised, and this was someone else playing a cruel game? It was a phrase so full of warmth and home that it felt like a jarring note in the cold, terrifying symphony of the past week. And then, like the sun breaking through a storm cloud, the memory hit me. It washed over me so vivid and so powerful that I was no longer a 72-year-old woman in a dark study. I was a little girl again, standing in my Aunt Bessie's warm, sunlit kitchen in the heart of Atlanta. The air was thick with the smell of cinnamon, nutmeg, and melting butter. Gospel music was always playing softly from an old radio on top of her refrigerator. Bessie was a large, joyful woman with flour always dusting her apron, and she hummed along to Mahalia Jackson while she worked her magic. Her sweet potato pie wasn't just a dessert, it was a sacrament. It was the taste of Thanksgiving, of Christmas, of every joyful celebration in our family's history. The recipe was a secret, a legacy passed down from her mother, written on a faded, spattered index card she kept tucked away in her Bible. When my own son Jamal was a little boy, he was a picky eater who would turn his nose up at almost everything, but he would devour Aunt Bessie's pie. He would sit at her kitchen table, his little legs dangling from the chair, a smudge of orange on his cheek, his eyes closed in pure bliss. After Bessie passed on to glory, that faded recipe card became my most treasured inheritance. It became my sacred duty to recreate that taste of home, that feeling of safety and unconditional love for my own son. When Jamal went off to college, he was homesick and overwhelmed, a Southern boy lost in the cold winters of Boston. During his first semester, he called me, his voice sounding small and far away. He was struggling. The next morning, I baked a pie, packed it in dry ice, and shipped it to his dorm overnight. Tucked inside was a note that read, "A little taste of home to remind you where you come from and the strength you carry inside you." He told me later that pie, that taste of his great-aunt's love and his mother's care, was what got him through that first year. From then on, it became our secret language. "I need some of that sweet potato pie" was his code for "I'm having a hard time." It meant, "I love you." It meant, "You are not alone." It meant, "Remember who you are." It was the perfect password. It wasn't a birthday or a pet's name or any piece of data that could be hacked or guessed. It was a memory. It was a legacy. It was a secret that belonged only to a mother and her son. Something that a cold, calculating outsider like Chantel, with her designer dresses and her soulless ambition, could never in a million years understand. The memory faded, and I was back in my study, the phone still clutched in my hand. The cryptic message was no longer confusing. It was a beacon of light. My son was not just alive. He was thinking, he was fighting, and he was trusting me to be his partner. I took a deep, steadying breath, the despair I had felt just moments before, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and purpose. "I hear you, baby," I whispered to the empty room. "Mama hears you." My son had just given me the key. Now it was time to unlock the door and let the truth come out. An hour later, Mark and I sat in my study, the room where my husband had once read his newspapers, the room where Jamal had done his homework. The backup hard drive from Jamal's office was plugged into Mark's laptop. In front of us was the password prompt, the digital wall that had stood between us and the truth. 3 incorrect attempts, and the drive would be wiped clean forever. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed the words, not as a password, but as a prayer: Aunt Bessie's sweet potato pie. I hit enter. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then the password window vanished. A single folder appeared on the screen. It was named with a chilling simplicity that spoke volumes of my son's methodical mind. The folder was labeled Contingency. My relief was so overwhelming, I felt lightheaded. Mark let out a slow, steadying breath beside me. I clicked open the main folder. Inside it wasn't a jumble of files. It was a perfectly organized case file, as if prepared by a seasoned detective. There were 4 subfolders: audio, video, emails, and a final one named Read Me First. "Play the audio," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mark clicked the folder, and a list of dated files appeared. He clicked the oldest one from 7 months ago and handed me a pair of headphones. I put them on, and the silence of my study was replaced by the muffled sound of a conversation in a car. And then I heard her voice, Chantel's. "It's taking too long," she said, her voice sharp and impatient, completely devoid of the sweet, melodic tone she used in public. "The market is volatile. His portfolio could lose 10% of its value in a week. We need to move." Then another voice, a man's voice, smooth and confident. It was Damien Thorne, Jamal's biggest business rival, a corporate shark who had tried to buy my son's company for years. He was the man Jamal had considered his nemesis. "Patience, baby," he said, his tone intimate and condescending. "A man with his profile doesn't just disappear. It has to be perfect. It has to be tragic. No questions asked. The insurance company will scrutinize everything. We can't afford any mistakes." I felt sick. My hand gripped the mouse until my knuckles were white. We listened for over an hour, jumping from file to file, a chronological descent into hell. We heard them plan my son's death as if they were planning a corporate merger. They discussed methods, a car crash, a robbery gone wrong. They settled on the boating accident first, then discarded it as too complicated. They laughed about my son's trust in them. They talked about the life they would have together after, the places they would travel, the empire they would control. Marcus hadn't just been a target. He was an obstacle to their greed. Next, Mark clicked the video folder. It contained footage from a small hidden camera. The angle was from a bookshelf in my son's home office. I saw Chantel and Damien wrapped in each other's arms, kissing passionately in the very room where my son worked 18-hour days to build the future she was now plotting to steal. The date stamp was from a day Jamal was on a business trip to San Francisco. They were so arrogant, so sure of themselves, that they would betray him in his own sanctuary. It was a level of disrespect so profound that it took my breath away. Finally, we opened the emails folder. It contained printouts of encrypted messages between them sent through a secure server that Jamal had clearly hacked. This was where the cold, hard logistics of their plan were laid bare. They discussed scouting homeless shelters in the city. They talked about finding a man of Jamal's general height and build. They referred to him not as a person, but as the asset. They called him a ghost, a nobody who wouldn't be missed. One email from Chantel read, "Found a promising candidate at the downtown shelter. Mid-40s, similar build. No known family. He's perfect. Another from Damien laid out the final steps. The car is registered to a shell corp. Andre will handle the body pickup from the morgue. We'll stage the accident on the 285 late Thursday night. The fire will take care of the rest. By Monday morning, you'll be a very wealthy widow. The methodical, casual cruelty of it all was staggering. They had hunted a human being like an animal, a man who was already down on his luck, and they had snuffed out his life without a second thought, all for money. The final folder was Read Me First. It contained a single, simple text document. Mark opened it. It was a letter from my son. Mom, it began. If you are reading this, it means they did it. I found the first recording by accident. I had a program that flags unusual activity on our home network. An audio file was being uploaded to a strange server. I got curious. I listened. And in that moment, my entire world fell apart. I didn't want to believe it. So I started digging. I put the camera in the office. I cracked their encrypted emails. The more I found, the more I realized how much danger I was in. I wanted to go to the police, Mom. I swear I did. But Damien Thorne is not just a businessman. He's connected. He has judges and cops on his payroll. If I had walked into a precinct, I would have disappeared before I ever saw a courtroom. So I ran. I had to let them think they won. I had to let them have their funeral and bury a stranger in my place. I had to become a ghost to stay alive. I'm sorry to put you through this. I'm sorry for the pain I knew this would cause you. But you are the only one I could trust. You are the strongest person I have ever known. They see a retired principal. I see a queen who has fought for her community her entire life. The man they killed. His name was Michael George. He told one of the shelter workers he was an Army veteran who had fallen on hard times after his wife died. He had a daughter somewhere in California he hadn't spoken to in years. He wasn't a ghost. He was a person. He deserved better. Find justice for him, Mom. Find justice for me. They think they have won, but they don't know you like I do. I love you, Jamal. I took off the headphones. The silence in the study was deafening. Mark and I just looked at each other, the weight of what we had discovered settling upon us. It was a story of greed, of betrayal, of murder. My son was alive, but he was hunted. An innocent man named Michael George was dead. And the two people responsible were celebrating their victory, living in my son's house, preparing to spend my son's money. The rage I felt was a pure, white-hot fire. It burned away the last of my grief and forged it into a single, unshakable purpose. They thought they had planned the perfect crime, but they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated a mother, and I was coming for them. The evidence on the hard drive was a ticking bomb, and Chantel herself had provided the perfect place to detonate it. The repast, the traditional gathering after a funeral in our community, was supposed to be a time of quiet reflection, of sharing food and memories. In our world, a repast is a sacred thing. It's held in the church basement or a family home, and the air is thick with the smell of fried chicken collard greens and sweet potato pie, all made by the loving hands of the church sisters. The sound is one of quiet gospel hymns, of shared laughter, and tears a blanket of community to comfort a grieving family. But this was not a repast. This was a coronation. When I walked through the massive front doors of the mansion my son had bought her, my heart hardened into a cold, heavy stone. There was no gospel music. Instead, a live jazz trio was set up by a shimmering blue pool, their smooth, secular notes drifting through the air. There was no buffet line of food made with love. Instead, waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowd, carrying silver trays of champagne flutes and tiny, unidentifiable hors d'oeuvres. In the center of the grand foyer, a champagne fountain flowed, a vulgar symbol of celebration. Chantel had taken our sacred tradition of mourning and twisted it into a spectacle of her newfound wealth. She was the star of her own grotesque show. She had shed her mourning black for a stunning, deep purple gown that clung to her like a second skin. Around her neck was a diamond necklace I had never seen before, a glittering collar that must have cost a fortune. She wasn't receiving condolences. She was holding court. She moved through the room with a confident proprietary air, laughing with Jamal's business associates, introducing Damien Thorne, who never left her side as her rock through this terrible time. I watched her from across the room, a ghost at my own family's feast. I saw the way people looked at her with a mixture of pity and admiration. They saw a strong, beautiful young widow bravely carrying on. I saw a predator celebrating a successful hunt. Every clink of a champagne glass sounded like a cash register. Every laugh was an insult to my son's memory. This wasn't a house of mourning. It was a den of thieves, and they were feasting on my son's legacy. My role was simple. I was the matriarch, the grieving mother. I was expected to sit quietly in a corner to be a tragic, silent figurehead for her performance, and I played the part perfectly, my silence a coiled spring of rage, waiting for the precise moment to strike. An hour into the event, after a series of speeches from business leaders who praised my son's ambition, but clearly didn't know the first thing about his heart, Chantel tapped a crystal glass for attention. The music stopped. "Thank you all for being here," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "It means so much to feel the love of this community as I navigate this impossible time. There is one person here who knew and loved my brilliant husband more than anyone, his mother, our beloved matriarch, Imani Washington. Imani, we would be so honored if you would share a few final words of tribute for your son." A respectful silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to me. This was it, the moment of reckoning. I placed my napkin on the table and rose from my chair. I walked towards the front of the room, not with the slow shuffle of a grieving elder, but with the steady, measured pace of a principal walking to the podium for assembly. I could feel every eye on me. I nodded to the AV technician in the back of the room. It was Mark. He gave me a barely perceptible nod in return. The stage was set. I stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces. I saw investors, friends, and the members of my church, their faces etched with sympathy. I saw Damien Thorne, my son's business rival, standing beside Chantel, his hand placed possessively on the small of her back. And I saw Chantel looking at me with an expression of perfect pious sorrow, the grieving widow giving the mother her moment in the spotlight. "Thank you, Chantel." I began, my voice clear and strong, resonating through the silent room with an authority it had not lost with retirement. "And thank you all for being here to honor my son Jamal. I am not here tonight to speak of sorrow. My son's life was not a tragedy. It was a testament to the power of a dream built on a foundation of integrity. I am here to talk about the legacy he truly left behind." I paused, letting my gaze drift over the crowd before landing squarely on Chantel and Damien. A legacy is not just about the money you leave behind or the company you build. It is about the truth you live. It is about the promises you keep. My son was a meticulous man. He documented everything. He believed that the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, will always, always find its way to the light. In his final months, he was working on a very special project, an insurance policy of sorts, a plan to protect his legacy from those who would seek to corrupt it. And tonight, I think it's only right that I share a part of that project with you all. I took my phone out of my purse. Chantel's polite smile tightened at the edges. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "Jamal always wanted to share his success with his community," I said, my fingers moving on the screen. "And tonight he also wants to share the truth." I pressed a button on my phone, connecting it to the house's expensive Sonos sound system. For a moment there was only silence. A few people exchanged confused glances. Then a scratchy, muffled sound filled the room. It was the sound of a secret recording. And then a voice, sharp and venomous, a voice everyone in that room knew echoed from the hidden speakers. Chantel's voice. "It's taking too long," her recorded voice snapped. "The market is volatile. His portfolio could lose 10% of its value in a week. We need to move." A collective, audible gasp went through the room. People turned to stare at Chantel, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Her face had frozen, the color draining from it, her smile a grotesque rictus of horror. Then Damien Thorne's voice, smooth and confident, replied from the speakers. "Patience, baby. It has to be perfect. It has to be tragic. No questions asked. The insurance company will scrutinize everything. We can't afford any mistakes." The room fell into a deathly silence. The only sound was the recorded conversation of the two people who now stood exposed in the center of the room. Every eye was on them, the weight of 100 gazes like a physical force. On the large television screen over the fireplace, where a slideshow of Jamal's smiling photos had been playing, a new image appeared. It was a copy of an encrypted email, now decrypted. The subject line was clear for all to see: the asset. The email read, "Found a promising candidate at the downtown shelter. Mid-40s, similar build, no known family. He's perfect." The whispers started then, a wave of horror rippling through the crowd. "Oh my God!" someone behind me whispered. "Is this real?" But I wasn't finished. Jamal was a thorough man, I said into the microphone, my voice like steel. The screen changed again, this time to the video from the hidden camera. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as Chantel and Damien embraced and kissed passionately in my son's office. The visual proof, the undeniable evidence of their betrayal, landed like a physical blow. That's when the chaos erupted. The whispers turned into open accusations. People who had been hugging Chantel minutes before were now backing away, their faces masks of disgust. The illusion was shattered. The grieving widow and her supportive friend were revealed for what they were: a venomous snake and a circling vulture. Damien shot to his feet, grabbing Chantel's arm. "We have to go!" he hissed, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. They turned and made a break for the doors, shoving past guests who recoiled from their touch. The party had become a crime scene, and the guests were now witnesses. "And one more thing," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. As if on cue, the grand ballroom doors at the back of the room swung open. Standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 uniformed APD officers, was my son, Jamal Hayes. He was thinner with a beard, but he was alive. He was gloriously, beautifully alive. The entire room froze. If the audio recording was a shock, this was a cataclysm. A collective audible gasp went through the entire room. It was a sound of disbelief, of shock, of a miracle. Chantel stopped dead in her tracks. She turned her eyes wide with disbelief and terror. She looked at the ghost in the doorway, then at me on the stage, and a sound escaped her throat. A choked animal sound of pure horror. Then her legs gave out, and she collapsed in a heap of designer fabric on the marble floor. One of the detectives with Jamal stepped forward. "Damien Thorne Chantel Washington," he said, his voice booming through the room. "You are under arrest for the murder of Michael George and for conspiracy to commit fraud." As the police moved in, cuffing a sputtering Damien and a sobbing, hysterical Chantel, Jamal looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. Mark stepped to my side and spoke, his voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Jamal discovered the plot and came to the authorities. For the last 2 months, he hasn't just been in hiding. He's been working as a cooperating witness with the FBI on a much larger federal investigation into Damien Thorne's money laundering operations. His wife's pathetic little murder plot was just the loose thread that unraveled their entire criminal empire. The final twist landed with the force of a thunderclap. Chantel hadn't just been outsmarted by her mother-in-law. She had been a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. As she and Damien were led away, their worlds utterly destroyed, Jamal walked slowly towards me through the stunned and silent crowd. He stopped in front of me, the boy I had raised, the man they could not break. I didn't cry. I just reached out and put my hand on his cheek. He covered it with his own. "I got your message, baby," I whispered. "I knew you would, Mom," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. We stood there for a moment, a mother and son reunited, surrounded by the community that was our true foundation. My faith had been tested, but it had not broken. My son's life had been stolen, but he had taken it back. The legacy of our family was not in a mansion or a bank account. It was in our resilience, our truth, and our unwavering love. And that was a fortune no one could ever take away. This story is a powerful reminder to never underestimate the quiet strength and sharp intellect of a matriarch. Imani Washington's journey teaches us that the most effective response to profound betrayal isn't always loud fury, but cold, calculated patience. By trusting her instincts and meticulously gathering the truth, she transformed her grief into an unbreakable shield for her son. It demonstrates that a legacy built on integrity will always triumph over ambition rooted in greed. Ultimately, it's a testament to a mother's love, a force that is strategic, relentless, and powerful enough to uncover any lie. Have you ever had a gut feeling that something was deeply wrong, even when everyone around you was acting normal?